The Reserve Bank has announced that interest rates are down by 25%. That is, the repo rate is now at 8% and the prime lending rate is now at 11.5%. This is good news for consumers who are highly indebted. But of course, as my guest said earlier, it's probably not enough, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm joined in studio by Mandisa Zavala, the head of asset allocations at AlexForbes, Annaline van der Poel. She's the COO of Debt Rescue, and Xhanti Payi, he's an economist at PwC. Xhanti, let me come to you. The Reserve Bank governor, he keeps on talking about certain structural changes or certain things that need to happen in our economy. Watching our public debt, I think he's been saying that for at least the past 18 months. That's an issue for him. And also talking about our network industries. Just elaborate on these issues and why they're so important to be addressed in terms of getting our economic growth story right.
I thought that was quite an interesting one because obviously I think the one thing he first starts with talking to us about the external issues, and then he comes back and he says, you know, we need to continue the agenda of economic reforms. Now, many of us will know that we have seen a lot of this work that has been done by Operation Vulindlela on issues of network issues. So that's electricity, that's logistics. These have been key issues within the country that we've had to resolve. We know now that it seems that the electricity grid is stable, so electricity is coming through in a predictable way. We know that Transnet has been doing some work in terms of its own infrastructure and making sure that the logistics is starting to look much better than it was. So there is a lot of work that's coming through them, but as he notes that a lot of work has to actually continue to make sure that those reforms are undertaken and they're stabilized. And that's something that's not going to happen in terms of the comfort levels that we need for the next few years at least. But I think one of the key things that we're starting to see, though, is that consumer confidence that has come through because of the reforms that are coming through. So I think that's something that's positive, but certainly we know it needs to be consistent and we need to keep on that path. So that's really the kinds of things he's been talking about, the same kinds of problems that we've faced over the past few years. And some of them obviously have come to fruition in terms of the resolution of many of those. But the network industries, obviously, and issues of telecoms are important in terms of our pricing of telecoms costs. That's something that's quite also important. So those network industries, as he's put them, are very, very important. But there has been work that has been substantial that's been done and is coming through.
Xhanti, thank you for that. On the left-hand side of your screen, you will see that procession carrying the body of Pravin Gordan heading to Reservoir Hills, where he's going to be having a private cremation. Of course, we are going to keep on top of that story as and when things develop. And so we continue. Mandisa, Rand strength. We've all been observing that the Rand has been strengthening very nicely, especially in the lead up significantly to the US Fed decision as well as the SABC decision. The question is, can that be sustained? And the Reserve Bank governor did talk about how important this would be in terms of the importation of inflation, that it will assist in continuing to keep inflation on the right track. But is it sustainable, do you think?
To a certain extent, because I think we also need to take into account that global inflation is coming down, but very slow. I think, you know, the comment was made around the fact that, you know, it went up at a much, much faster pace. And the concerns for global central bankers have been that the pace at which it's sort of come off is slow. And the expectation is that going forward, we're probably not going to go back to the levels that we've become accustomed to over the last 10 years, especially globally when it comes to inflation, but that it's going to remain slightly, you know, subdued because of all the other issues that we've spoken about, like geopolitical tensions. You know, there's a lot of things that we can point to. And so with that being said, interest rates typically remain slightly higher, which means that from a South African perspective, I think he spoke about the fact that, you know, the differential between our bond yields and US bond yields is actually what brings investors into South Africa to invest. And that typically is great for our currency. But if you have the US still having positive, having yields that are attractive, you do find that some of that flow remains in the US. So yes, you know, we're likely going to see, you know, a little bit more slight strength when it comes to the currency, but I think it's also to a particular level. And also a lot of that also is driven by the US. And I think them coming out very strong to say they're cutting by 50 basis points is very positive for emerging market currencies. If they continue in that pace, then again, we're going to benefit from that. But again, that's not going to continue perpetually. There's a level at which we're probably going to stop at.
Yeah. Annaline, the governor talked about, or he was asked a question about the impact of the two-pot system and people being able to tap onto their savings, what impact that may have on inflation. And he said at the moment that's not yet calculable. But of course, he talked about the fact that some people will use it to pay down debt and some people will just go and have a party with it. From where you sit, looking at the condition of the consumer, for those, who do access their funds, what would you advise?
I think we've got to be, very realistic about what exactly it means when we say accessing these funds. Because we've got to remember that there's the maximum amount that it's going to start off with immediately is 30,000 Rand, and that is going to be taxed. So consumers have got to remember that even though they're talking about the two-pot system and, 1/3, it's 1/3 going forward, not 1/3 of what you already have. So in other words, if you are going to be tapping into it right now or in the next couple of months, it'll be a maximum of 30,000 Rand, and then obviously with the 1/3 that gets contributed into the future. And then you have the tax component. So what are you getting out, and what real true impact does it have? Because for most consumers, the access that they're going to have is not going to be, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of rands that they have access to here. And the long-term impact of taking out any form of investment into your future, into your retirement one day, is very negative, because we've got, depending on where you are in your life and how many years you still have left before you retire, this could have a significant impact on the end result. And are you going to be able to retire if you take out 1/3 now, 1/3 every year, whatever the case may be? And the true application of that is, if you're going to apply it to debt, obviously that's always a good thing. But how much of an impact will it have right now? For, I think, the majority of consumers, very little. And if you're going to be spending it on anything except debt, it's really not advisable to look at that. We strongly recommend rather leave it there and find alternative solutions if debt is your concern.
Well, good advice there. Xhanti, in terms of the structural issues, you've talked about the network industries and all of that. But just in terms of the efforts that are being made, we have the various comms, in relation to electricity, and then we have the logistics, the National Logistics Committee as well, looking to improve Transnet and the rail and the ports and so on and so forth. Are we on the right track? Are we going to begin to see material benefits? And also, we understand that Transnet, for example, needs over 100 billion Rand, but they keep on getting, 5 billion here, 20 billion there. It doesn't seem as though they're getting enough. But how confident are you that we're going to see material changes in the next couple of years such that our growth trajectory looks that much better?
It's an interesting question, because when the presidency and the National Treasury released the update for Operation Vulindlela, what they said was that what they have been able to achieve in terms of the restructuring had actually unleashed investment to the value of about 500 billion or half a trillion. So that's what they said actually had been the impact of the reforms through Operation Vulindlela. But then, of course, they also highlighted that they would do some more work, independent work would be done to actually approximate really the kind of investment or the kind of impact that would have had on the economy. So if that is true, then of course, then we are starting to see that coming through in terms of what we need to do, because obviously what we need is the investment that comes through when these parts of the economy are starting to work better. And of course, I think one of the interesting things here is also that what we are trying to do is not so much, I guess, to get money from the South African government, because we know that the government is highly indebted, but the reforms that would allow private investment to actually flow in terms of going into the economy to resolve some of the challenges that we are facing. So one supposes that an important part of this discussion is really about making sure that you are actually unleashing or opening up space for investment into the economy through the reforms that we are making in these industries, especially where investment has been held back as a result. We can think about the mining sector in particular, agriculture and the various sectors that have been affected, small businesses that have been affected, and other areas that have been affected by energy restriction or energy shortages. So the main thing is about how we actually make sure that there's a flow of investment, and that is what we are actually looking for here. We're not looking to see that they get, small monies from government. So when they ask for 100 billion, they get 50, and it's sort of with restrictions over a period of time. But that actually we can bring in investment, and some of that reforms actually is about what the Treasury is trying to do in allowing private sector participation into this space, and that's another reform that's going to be important.
Right, we're getting towards the end of our analysis, but I will just end with Mandisa, just really around the inflation, the interest rate trajectory. What is your base case for interest rates in terms of how much they'll be cut to the end of 2025? And based on what you're expecting, what sort of material impact should that have on the consumer?
Right. So I think in order to understand, or rather have a view on the interest rate trajectory, we sort of glean towards expectations, essentially, or inflation expectations. And I think the governor sort of pointed towards that they are slightly uncomfortable with regards to inflation, with regards to what inflation expectations are at the moment, because they still remain above the 4.5 line, which means that they want that to come down as well. And one of the comments he had made in the last MPC was that the man on the street starts to believe that inflation is going to come down when they see consecutive prints of inflation coming down. And I think it's the same with the governor as well. So going forward, we think there will definitely be some cuts, and they will proceed. Probably maybe another 25 basis points that we will get, before the end of the year, and maybe if we're lucky, maybe one more next year as well.